Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. Hope all of you will be fine and enjoying your good health, right? Uh, we were previously discussing short story, The Blanket, and we discussed that there were four, at least four main characters in the story that were Peter, his granddad, his father, and then the young lady who was to be married soon. We should say that married soon to uh, Peter's father, right? And we discussed that Peter's granddad was a very sensible, very practical, wise, and we should say that good heart person, good-hearted person. We should say that, and he was trying to adjust. He was trying to compromise because of the players, because of the we should say that uh, happiness that he wanted to see. Uh, his son wanted to see his son enjoy his life, enjoy his matters of life very well without his disturbance. So he was appreciating the blanket. The blanket was a going away gift, and that was to be presented to the granddad by his son. That was Peter's father. So we discussed that. Right now we are going to discuss the next part, and it was the part where the young lady uh, who was to marry, we should say that, and Peter's father came there, and she went to his granddad, Peter's granddad, and told him that she wanted to say goodbye to him because she won't be able to see him in the morning. It is actually an ironic statement too. It means that she didn't want to see granddad in the morning, the next morning, right? So it is a kind of you, said granddad, looking down at the floor and then seeing the blanket at his feet. He bent down to pick it up. And will you look at this? He said, sounding himself like a little boy. Isn't this a fine blanket my son has given me to go away with? Right. Once again, the granddad was saying that that was a fine blanket. He was appreciating, and he was saying that it was also kind of her, the young lady that was going to marry uh, Peter's father. And so, once again, the granddad was just appreciating his son, and he was saying that the blanket was very fine, and it was a very good thing that he was having that fine blanket just to go away with that. Yes, she said, it's a fine blanket. She felt the wool again and said, a fine blanket indeed. She turned to Dad and said to him coldly, it must have cost a pretty penny. Once again, the young girl, actually, she felt that the wool of that blanket, that was an expensive blanket, that was, of course, a fine blanket indeed. She turned to Dad and said to him coldly. Coldly mean we should say that unfriendly, to say that without any feeling, emotions. Coldly also stands for carelessly, cruelly. And she was saying that it must uh, it must have been purchased for a good price because it was a very, we should say that costly, we should say that costly blanket must have been. She was saying pretty penny. Pretty penny mean penny is just a unit of money, little unit of money, very, very little unit of money. But it here means that it costs too much. Actually, she wanted to say. That cleared his throat. I wanted to have the best. Now, once again, we can look at the sentence structure, that there are some dots that are present here in the end of the first sentence. That is actually not his father. Mean Peter's father did not end the sentence. Rather, he wanted to say something else. Then he was disturbed. It means that he was actually surprised by the comment of his soon-to-be wife, and she was actually in a way criticizing why uh, her husband had purchased a blanket that cost too much, that cost too much. And so she was actually criticizing. That was actually a way of inquiring why he had purchased such a blanket that cost too much. The girl stood there still looking at the blanket. Mom, it's a double one too. And once again, no, here we should say that Peter was also intervening. He said that it was a double one too. Yes, the old man said, it's a double one, a fine blanket for an old fellow to be going away with. The boy suddenly walked into the house. He could hear the girl still talking about the expensive blanket. He heard his dad get angry in his slow way, and now she was leaving. As Peter came out, the girl turned and called back, no matter what you say, he doesn't need a double blanket. Now, it is disclosed that the newly, we should say that to be married wife of Peter's father, or we should say that Peter's stepmother, that was to be stepmother, she was not in favor of presenting such a double blanket, and that was expensive to granddad, to Peter's granddad. She was actually criticizing that that was very expensive blanket and that was double too. She was in favor. She was of the opinion that such a blanket should not be given to an old person. That was, of course, a double blanket, and double blanket he won't need it. Dad looked at her with a funny look in his eye. She's right, Dad. The boy said, Granddad doesn't need a double blanket. Here, Dad, and held out a pair of scissors. Cut it, Dad. Cut the blanket in two. Once again, uh, she was just arguing. She was discussing while Peter came in. We should say that came in the room, and he said that of course he was also in favor that that double blanket was not needed by granddad, and such a double blanket, of course, he won't need. So he was saying that he should not present. He should not give such a, we should say that, double blanket to him. Hear that, and held out a pair of scissors, cut it that, cut the blanket in two. And now he was saying that uh, that blanket should be cut into two. No, it was a suggestion. It was a, we should say that, uh, we should say that an advice from, we should say, Peter. And now here comes that Peter comes to be a very sensible, or we should say that very wise boy, a young boy who was very wise. And now he had come there. At this point, we don't know why he is saying for that. Why is he in view of cutting that double blanket into two? But we consider, or we feel that the young guy was very wise. Both of them looked at the boy surprised, and then they looked at the boy, and both of them were surprised. Of course, this was quite a sudden, we should say that statement, sudden suggestions that was given by Peter. All of a sudden, cut it into two. I tell you that, and keep the other half. That's not a bad idea, said Granddad gently. I don't need such a big blanket. Once again, we should look at the sentence that Granddad was also a very meek, docile person, and he was not creating any kind of disturbance, even when it was said that the blanket was to be divided into two parts. Once again, we looked at the character of the Granddad, that he was very good person. He was very sensible, reasonable man who didn't want to create any disturbance in his family, in his son's family. Yes, the boy said, a single blanket is enough for an old man when he is sent away. Will save the other half that it will come in useful later. And no, the boy was telling his intention. The boy was telling about his intention, why he has suggested for that cutting off that blanket into two halves. No, what do you mean by that? Asked that. When he said that he would keep the other half for the later use and later useful use. At this point, Peter's father was surprised. He was shocked, and he wanted to ask what was the meaning of useful letter. What was the useful letter of that? No, what do you mean by that? Asked Dad. I mean, said the boy slowly, that I'll give it to you, Dad, when you are old, and I'm sending you away. Very, and we should say that ironic situation here. and the boy wanted to present that, we should say that, blanket to his father. Peter wanted to present that blanket to his father when he would get very old in future, and he would follow the tradition. And it's also a kind of lesson that he wanted to teach him. There was a big silence, and then dad went over to granddad and stood before him, not saying a word. And then dad went over to granddad, यानी granddad के पास गया, और वो वहाँ पर खड़ा देख रहा था, सोच रहा था कि उस लड़के ने, यानी उस लड़के ने एक तरह से पीटर्स के करैक्टर ने उसको हैरान कर दिया। यानी वो ये सोच भी नहीं सकता था कि उसका बेटा इस तरह से भी सोच रहा है। तो ये एक तरह से एक शॉर्ट किस्म की एक आयोनिक स्टेटमेंट है, जो कि ये बताना चाह रहा है कि वो एक्चुअली अपने ग्रैंड डैड को जाने की इजाज़त नहीं देना चाह रहा, या वो अपने ग्रैंड डैड के साथ रहना चाह रहा है, और अगर वो इस तरह से करेगा तो ऑफ कोर्स फ्यूचर में वो भी इसी तरह से करेगा। बट ग्रैंड डैड अंडरस्टूड, फॉर ही पुट आउट हिज हैंड एंड लेड इट ऑन डैड्स शोल्डर। अब ग्रैंड डैड जो है वो इस बात को समझ गया था कि उसने अपने हाथ फैलाया, एंड लेड इट ऑन डैड्स शोल्डर, और डैड के शोल्डर पे रखे। पीटर वाज वाचिंग देम एंड ही हर्ड ग्रैंड डैड विस्पर सॉफ्टली, इट्स ऑल राइट सन, आई न्यू यू डिडंट मीन इट। और फिर से वो ये कह रहा था कि यानी अब यहाँ पे ग्रैंड डैड समझ गया था कि उसका जो ग्रैंडसन है वो क्या लेसन इसको टीच करना चाह रहा है। वंस अगेन ही वाज सेइंग दैट ही डिडंट मीन इट, यानी वंस अगेन जो यहाँ पर ग्रैंड डैड है, he was actually saying, whispering mean he was saying in very low voice, and he didn't want to disturb his son, and he didn't want to blame his son once again. He was saying that he didn't mean that, यानी वो अपने बेटे से कह रहा था कि डेफिनेटली उसका ये मतलब नहीं था, यानी he didn't want to hurt him, of course मतलब उसका यही था, but it is a way that his granddad, Peter's granddad, was very well aware of the disturbance that he might create for his family in future. And then Peter cried, और फिर पीटर जो है वो रोने लगा, but it didn't matter because all three were crying together, और सब तीनों, यानी उसमें उसकी जो न्यूली टू बी मैरिड, वी शुड से दैट स्टेप मदर थी पीटर की, वो उसमें इंक्लूडेड नहीं थी, लेकिन बाकी सब लोग क्राई कर रहे थे। सो दिस स्टोरी, दिस शॉर्ट स्टोरी came to an end very happily, in a very we should say that in a very good way, and it also uh, we should say that conveys a very good moral lesson, that if you are behaving very badly, if you are not behaving with your elders in a good way, definitely you won't expect, you won't hope that your youngers uh, will behave with you in a good way. So the story comes to an end in a very ironic situation. Here is about the author. That's not very important. You should also, you might read it just for the sake of knowledge, but it is not a part of your examination. And no, we have come to an end of this story, and we should keep in mind all the questions, all the parts. Very we should say that very important question is that why did Peter want to cut the blanket into two halves? When you are asked about that question, you should write in two ways the answer of that question. The first one should be the intention of his, we should say that teaching lesson to his father. He wanted to teach his father a lesson that he should not behave like that. And the other, of course, the apparent intention that is also very clear, that he wanted to keep that the other half for later use, or he wanted to keep that for the purpose of we should say that gift or presenting that part of blanket to his father when he would be very old again. So this character, granddad character, is very important. His father character, his father. When we talk about Peter's father, we can say that he was not a person who was, we should say that, uh, with bad intention. He was not too much evil character, or we should say that a little bit he was diverted by the attraction of that young lady that he was going to marry, and it might be the, we should say the reason that she might have asked him just to send his father away from that home. So we should say that a little bit he was, we should say that averted from his family intentions, or he was away from family bonds, but it was for the little time, though he was not a हम कह सकते हैं कि बैड हार्टेड पर्सन नहीं था या बुरे दिल वाला आदमी नहीं था, थोड़ी देर के लिए वो डाइवर्ट हो गया था अपने वी शुड से दैट अटेंशन से, अपनी फैमिली मैटर से, लेकिन वो बाद में of course we can say that he came to the point later in the last part of the story. And so the story came to an end in a very good way, and it conveys a very good moral lesson, and that is very इंटरेस्टिंग शॉर्ट स्टोरी, बहुत शॉर्ट, हम कह सकते हैं कि शॉर्ट पॉट में, वेरी शॉर्ट वे में उसने एक मैसेज कन्वे किया है, स्टोरी को कंप्लीट किया है वेरी ब्यूटीफुली, एंड दैट इज़ क्वाइट, हम कह सकते हैं कि इसका एंड जो है वो बिल्कुल क्वाइट सडन है, सरप्राइजिंग है, यानी रीडर जब स्टोरी पढ़ रहा होता है तो वो ऐसा सपोज नहीं कर पा रहा होता, या ही इज़ नॉट एबल टू अंडरस्टैंड such an end of the story. Rather, he might be expecting some other end of the story that is quite sudden, that is quite surprising, and that is quite happy ending too. So this story is, we should say that very interesting and very uh, interesting, and of course, it is also conveying very good moral lesson to us. And so it is according to the circumstances, according to the, we should say that convention of the Western countries. In Pakistan, if we are asked for such cases, we should say that there are not too much cases. There are very little number of cases, such cases where old parents, where we should say that हमारे जो बुजुर्ग होते हैं उनको हम ओल्ड एज हाउसेज में या ओल्ड एज होम्स में भेजते हैं, बल्कि हमारे यहाँ जो है फैमिली नॉट्स बहुत डीप हैं, बहुत स्ट्रॉन्ग हैं, और हमारे जो एल्डर्स होते हैं, वो हमारे जो बुजुर्ग होते हैं, वो हमारे साथ रहते हैं. सो दैट इज द एंड ऑफ द स्टोरी. आई थिंक you have got it very well. If there is some question, you might ask me later. In any kind of question, you must keep in mind all the things, all the contents of the story. And so we are going to make an end right now.